So in the midst of the research we did, studying 250 churches that aren't aging or shrinking, but are growing young, we tried to figure out, what do these churches tend to have in common? And as we ruthlessly combed through the data, as we ruthlessly reviewed the stories and insights of young people, of parents, of pastors, of congregational leaders, of congregation members, we realized this, that we can distill what helps a church grow young into 6 core commitments. 6 core commitments that these churches tended to have in common. And we actually realized that they kind of form a wheel. You can think of all 6 core commitments making a circle that we call the growing young wheel. Now, I want to call your attention to what's in the very center of the wheel. In the very center of the wheel is Jesus-centered community. Every single church that we looked at was grounded in the truth, in the life, death, resurrection, and teachings of Jesus Christ. That was at the center of who they were and what they did. And I also want to call your attention to what's outside the growing young wheel. We love how in the midst of these churches having these 6 core commitments in common, these churches, they lived out those core commitments in different ways that match their context. And that's what each of us need to do also. I'm constantly trying to figure out, how does our research, how do the stories and practices of other church relate to my church? And we want you to do the same. Now let's do a brief overview of these 6 core commitments, the 6 qualities, the 6 characteristics, the 6 traits that these churches that were not aging and shrinking, but were doing incredible work with teenagers and young adults had in common. We'll start here at about 1 o'clock on the growing young wheel. These churches had amazing leaders. But what these leaders had in common is it wasn't that they were hip, it wasn't that they were cool. And by the way, my teenagers say just the fact that I use the word hip means that I'm not hip myself. So they weren't hip, they weren't cool, but they were keychain leaders who handed keys of influence and opportunity to the young people around them, to the teenagers and young adults around them. Not only that, but moving on to the next core commitment, these churches were empathetic. They cared deeply about what young people were going through. It wasn't us and them, it was all us. In the midst of that, these churches were very grounded in Jesus' message. They didn't get trapped in the culture of Christianity per se, but they were ruthless about focusing on Jesus. And that was magnetic and transforming to young people. Not only that, but these churches had warm relationships. They were a hotbed of honesty, of realness. They were like family. These churches prioritized young people and young people's families across the board. In fact, they had a disproportionate priority on young people. And when they prioritized young people, the entire church benefited. And then lastly, these churches neighbored well. They were committed to loving and serving in their local neighborhood, in our country, and in our world. These are the 6 core commitments. These are the 6 core qualities of what the churches in our research did and what your church can do in order to grow young.